She hid the secret inside her body for 5 months. A child, the baby of a man who died on Okinawa. If the enemy discovered it, she was certain they would take everything. The baby, her dignity, whatever remained of her shattered life. But the enemy she feared most would become the only person who could save her. This is a story about a secret, a promise, and the moment when hatred transformed into something no one expected. Emperor Hirohito's voice crackled through radios across Japan. This was the first time in history that ordinary citizens had heard their emperor speak. His words, wrapped in the formal language of the imperial court, carried a message that most could barely comprehend. Japan had surrendered. For the women serving in the auxiliary units of the Imperial Japanese Army, that broadcast marked the end of one nightmare and the beginning of another. They had served as nurses, clerks, telephone operators. Some had never left Tokyo. Others had watched the war collapse island by island until there was nowhere left to retreat. They had seen cities burn. They had buried friends in shallow graves. They had eaten grass and tree bark when the rice ran out. Now they were prisoners. American forces swept into Japan with an efficiency that stunned the population. The women were rounded up, processed through holding areas, and prepared for transport. But instead of remaining in Japan, a decision was made somewhere in the chain of command. These women would be transferred to the United States. Some said it was for security reasons. Others whispered about the chaos consuming the home islands. No one explained the real reason. Perhaps there was no reason. Perhaps in the aftermath of the greatest war in human history, decisions simply happened and people simply obeyed. 130 women boarded the transport ship USS General W.H. Gordon on a gray morning in late September. They stood on deck as the coastline of their homeland faded into the mist. Some wept, some stared in silence. Some had already retreated so far inside themselves that nothing could reach them anymore. Among them was a young woman who pressed her hand against her belly and prayed to gods she no longer believed in. Please, let them not discover. Let my baby live. Harumi Oshiro was 23 years old, small and sharp-eyed, with hands calloused from years of plugging and unplugging cables in military communication centers. She came from Osaka, the industrial city that American bombers had turned into an inferno 6 months earlier. She had been trained to stay calm under pressure, to keep her voice steady even when bombs fell close enough to shake the walls. She had listened to thousands of calls, victory reports that were lies, casualty figures that were true, the screaming of officers when fronts collapsed and communications went dark. But nothing had prepared her for what she carried inside, not a baby, something worse, hatred, pure and cold and absolute. The Americans had killed her mother. She remembered that night with perfect clarity. March 13th, 1945. The sirens began at midnight. By 1 in the morning, the sky over Osaka glowed orange. Incendiary bombs fell like rain, each one bursting into sticky fire that clung to wood and flesh and everything it touched. Harumi had been at the communication center when the attack began. Protocol demanded she remain at her station. She stayed for 4 hours relaying messages while the city burned, her hands steady on the switchboard, even as she smelled smoke drifting through the ventilation. When her shift ended at dawn, she ran home through streets that no longer existed. She found the house, or what remained of it. A neighbor, face blackened with soot, told her what happened. Her mother had been sleeping when the bombs hit. The fire spread too fast. She never woke up. She did not suffer. She went quickly. Harumi stood in the ashes of her childhood home and felt something inside her calcify into stone. She did not cry. She had no tears left. The fire had evaporated everything soft inside her. From that night forward, she carried her hatred like a weapon. Every American was responsible. Every American deserved suffering. When the war ended and she became a prisoner, she expected brutality. She expected torture. She expected the monsters from the propaganda posters to finally reveal themselves. What she did not expect was kindness. And kindness, she would discover, was far more dangerous than cruelty. Sitting near Harumi on the transport ship was an older woman whose hair had begun to gray and whose eyes had seen too much death. Fumiko Watanabe, 38 years old, a nurse who had served in field hospitals since 1942. She had delivered babies in bomb shelters. She had amputated limbs without anesthesia. She had held young soldiers as they died, telling them stories about home so they would not have to face the darkness alone. She remembered every single one. 247. That was the number she carried. 247 young men who had died with her hands pressed against their wounds, her voice the last human sound they heard. There was one she could not forget. Saipan, July 1944. The field hospital was a cave carved into volcanic rock. Hundreds of wounded lay in rows, their bandages soaked through, their faces gray with blood loss. A boy, perhaps 17, reached up and grabbed her sleeve. "Nurse," he whispered, "can you tell me about the ocean? I grew up in the mountains. I have never seen the sea." Fumiko knelt beside him. She described the ocean even though she had barely seen it herself. She spoke of waves and sand and the way sunlight danced on water. She made it beautiful for him. He smiled. "It sounds lovely." 5 minutes later, he stopped breathing. He was number 247. She had stopped counting after him. The numbers became too heavy to carry. On the transport ship crossing the Pacific, Fumiko watched the other women with the eyes of someone trained to read suffering. She saw the fear in every gesture, the desperation in every glance. And she noticed something else. A young woman in the far corner of the hold, dark hair tied back in a simple knot, moving carefully, slowly, always keeping one hand pressed against her belly. Fumiko had delivered more than 50 babies during the war. She knew what a pregnant woman looked like, even when that woman was trying to hide it. She said nothing, not yet, but she watched. Sachiko Tanaka was 20 years old. She should have been in university studying literature, dreaming about the future. Instead, she had spent 2 years as a clerk in military headquarters, filing papers and typing reports and bringing tea to officers who barely noticed she existed. She was pregnant, 5 months, perhaps 6. She was not certain. No doctor had examined her since the father of her child had died. His name was Kenji Yamamoto. She met him in Okinawa in the chaos of the final months of the war. He was a corporal, 22 years old, from a fishing village in Shikoku. He had a wide smile that seemed impossible in the middle of so much death, and a talent for finding beauty in the most terrible places. Their first encounter was an accident. Sachiko had spilled tea on a stack of important documents. Instead of reporting her, Kenji helped her clean up the mess. "The tea was terrible anyway," he said, grinning. "You saved the officers from having to drink it." She laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in months. They began meeting in secret, in an abandoned ammunition storage room, on the cliffs overlooking the ocean, in stolen moments between duties when no one was watching. Kenji told her about his village, about the fishing boats that went out at dawn, about his mother's cooking and his father's terrible jokes, about the life he wanted to build when the war ended. "I will take you there," he promised. "You will meet my mother. She will love you. We will have a house by the sea. We will watch the fishing boats come home every evening." Sachiko believed him. She believed everything. One night in a bomb shelter, while artillery thundered overhead, they gave themselves to each other. There were no marriage vows, no ceremony, no witnesses except the darkness and the distant explosions. Just two young people seeking warmth in a world that had gone cold. 2 weeks later, Kenji received orders to the front lines. She remembered their last moments together. He stood in the doorway of the command bunker, his pack on his back, his rifle in his hands. He looked so young. Too young to die. Too young for any of this. "Wait for me," he said. "I will come back." "I will wait," she promised. He walked away into the morning mist. She never saw him again. The news came 3 weeks later. Kenji Yamamoto had died in the assault on Sugarloaf Hill. His body was never recovered. Sachiko received the information with a face like stone. She thanked the messenger. She returned to her work. She filed papers and typed reports and brought tea to officers who did not notice that something inside her had shattered. 1 month later, she discovered she was pregnant. She told no one. She hid her growing belly under loose uniforms. When Japan surrendered and she was taken prisoner, she continued hiding. On the ship to America, she wrapped herself in shapeless clothing and stayed in the shadows. The baby was all she had left of Kenji, his final gift. The only proof that he had existed, that he had loved her, that their brief time together had meant something. She would die before she let anyone take it away, crossing the Pacific, 14 days on the ocean. The women expected brutality. They expected starvation. The propaganda had promised them that capture meant horror. American soldiers were savages. American prisons were death camps. Surrender was worse than death. Instead, they received blankets, clean wool blankets distributed by sailors who did not make eye contact but also did not strike or threaten or humiliate. They received food, not much but regular, rice and vegetables and sometimes even meat, more than many of them had eaten in months. They received medical attention. A Navy doctor checked on the sick, distributed medicine, asked questions through interpreters about symptoms and conditions. The kindness was more disturbing than cruelty would have been. Harumi sat in her corner of the hold and watched the sailors with suspicious eyes. This was a trick, it had to be. They were fattening the prisoners for something, building false trust before the inevitable betrayal. She had seen the burned bodies in Osaka. She had smelled her mother's ashes. No amount of blankets could erase that. But as the days passed and the brutality never came, something began to crack inside her certainty. On the seventh day, the American coastline appeared through the morning fog. San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge, skyscrapers gleaming in the autumn sun. The women stood on deck and stared at the city of the enemy. The city that propaganda had promised was crumbling. The city that was supposed to be starving, collapsing, tearing itself apart. It blazed with light and life and impossible prosperity. Harumi felt the first tremor of doubt, a tiny fracture in the wall of hatred she had built around herself. She pushed it down, buried it deep, told herself that surfaces could lie. The train was waiting at the dock. Fort Douglas. The journey east took 3 days. Through California valleys carpeted with golden wheat, through Nevada deserts painted in shades of red and orange, through Utah mountains already dusted with early snow. The women watched America scroll past their windows and felt their understanding of the world begin to crumble. The farms were enormous, not the small terrace plots of Japanese agriculture, but vast expanses of cultivated earth stretching to the horizon. Wheat, corn, orchards heavy with fruit, cattle grazing in pastures larger than villages. The cities were undamaged. No bomb craters, no burned buildings, no bread lines stretching through ruined streets, just normal life continuing as if the greatest war in history had never touched this place. Fort Douglas sat on the outskirts of Salt Lake City, an old military base converted into a detention facility. Wire fences surrounded wooden barracks arranged in neat rows. Guard towers rose at regular intervals. Searchlights swept the perimeter after dark. But inside the fences, the barracks had heating systems, real beds with mattresses, blankets stacked at the foot of each bunk. Sachiko walked into her assigned building and stopped breathing. Beds, actual beds, with mattresses. She had not slept on a mattress in over 2 years. The other women filed in behind her, each one freezing in turn as they confronted the impossible reality. This was supposed to be prison. This was supposed to be punishment. This was supposed to confirm everything they had been taught about American savagery. Instead, there were beds. That night, Sachiko lay on her mattress and placed her hand on her belly. The baby moved inside her, a tiny flutter of life in the midst of so much confusion. "We are safe for now," she whispered to the child she had never seen. "But I do not know for how long." The next morning brought medical examinations. The women lined up outside a converted office building, hearts pounding, minds racing with terrible possibilities. The rumors had spread through the barracks all night. The Americans would examine them, search them. The word examine carried implications that made several women weep with fear. Harumi entered the examination room first. Inside was a small space with a wooden desk, medical equipment on metal trays, and an American man in uniform. Sergeant William Harrison, 26 years old, sandy hair, blue eyes with dark circles beneath them from too many sleepless nights, a red cross stitched onto his sleeve. When Harumi entered, he looked up and smiled. That smile froze her in place. The enemy was not supposed to smile like that. Warm, genuine, as if she were a person rather than a prisoner. Harrison gestured to a chair. Harumi sat. He checked her eyes, her throat, listened to her breathing with a stethoscope that felt cold through her shirt. The entire examination took less than 5 minutes. Professional, efficient, completely without threat. When it was done, he handed her a small card with her name written in English. Then he did something that made her stop breathing. He bowed. Not the deep, formal bow of Japanese custom, but a bow nonetheless, a sign of respect. Harumi left the examination room with trembling hands. Outside, the other women crowded around her, asking questions in urgent whispers. Was it bad? Did they hurt you? Nothing, Harumi said, and even she could hear the confusion in her own voice. He did nothing. He was kind. The word felt strange in her mouth. Kind. The enemy was not supposed to be kind. William Harrison had enlisted in 1942, 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor. He was 19 years old, burning with the same patriotic fire that consumed an entire generation of American boys. He trained as a combat medic, or learned to treat wounds under fire, practiced the brutal triage of battlefield medicine. But the war never sent him to the front lines. A training accident left him with a damaged knee that would never fully heal. Not serious enough for discharge, but too serious for combat deployment. He spent the war in stateside hospitals treating wounded soldiers who had been evacuated from the Pacific, watching other men fight and die while he changed bandages and administered morphine. He felt like a failure, a coward, a man who had missed his generation's defining moment. Then his sister died, Sarah Harrison, 17 years old, blonde hair like wheat fields, a smile that could light up any room. She wanted to be a nurse like her big brother. She wanted to help people, save people, heal people. The cancer came quickly. Diagnosed in January, dead by March. William was in California when he received the letter from his mother. Sarah was fading. Please come home. But there were no available transports. No emergency leave approved. By the time the paperwork cleared, Sarah was already buried. He arrived home 3 days after the funeral. His mother handed him a letter Sarah had written in her final week. Dear Will, it said, I know you cannot be here. I understand. There is a war. People need you. But I want you to know something. You are not a failure because you did not go to combat. You are a healer. That is your gift. Promise me you will keep healing people. Promise me that for every person you could not save, you will save 10 more. That is how you honor me. That is how you make my death mean something. William Harrison read that letter and made a promise. He would save everyone he could. He would treat every patient, regardless of who they were, with the kindness he wished he could have given his sister. When he was assigned to Fort Douglas to oversee medical care for Japanese prisoners, some of his fellow soldiers questioned why he treated the enemy with such gentleness. He never explained. He did not need to. He knew why. Every frightened woman he examined was Sarah in his mind. Every patient he treated was a chance to keep his promise. The first real meal at Fort Douglas shattered what remained of their expectations. The women were led into a mess hall, a long room with wooden tables and benches, and smells so overwhelming that several of them stumbled. Bread, meat, things they had not tasted in years. They were handed metal trays, actual trays with separate compartments for different foods. A soldier behind the counter scooped rice onto each tray. Not the thin gruel of the final war months, but real rice, white and steaming. Then vegetables. Then meat. The women stared at their trays in disbelief. This was more food than many of them had seen in a single meal for over a year. Some had survived on nothing but sweet potato, stems, and miso soup so thin you could see the bottom of the bowl. Harumi picked up her chopsticks. The rice was still hot, releasing small clouds of steam. She took a bite. The taste was so overwhelming that tears sprang to her eyes. Around her, other women were experiencing the same thing. Some ate quickly, desperately, as if afraid the food would be taken away. Some ate slowly, savoring each bite. Some could not eat at all, paralyzed by guilt and confusion. An older woman named Yoshiko sat with her hands in her lap, tears streaming down her face. My son, she whispered. My son is starving in Hiroshima, and I sit here eating like this. The guilt was crushing. They were prisoners, and yet they were fed better than their own families back home. But hunger was stronger than guilt. One by one they ate. Sachiko sat surrounded by women who had unconsciously positioned themselves around her, eating slowly, one hand always drifting to her belly. She needed to eat. The baby needed nourishment. But every bite tasted like betrayal. Fumiko watched from a few seats away, saying nothing, observing everything. That night, when the barracks grew quiet and most women had fallen into exhausted sleep, Fumiko approached Sachiko's bunk. She knelt beside the younger woman and spoke in a whisper so soft it was nearly lost in the darkness. How far along? Sachiko's eyes flew open. Terror flashed across her face in the dim light. I do not understand what you mean. Do not lie to me. I have delivered more than 50 babies. I know what a pregnant woman looks like. Silence stretched between them. Sachiko's breathing quickened. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly. Finally, she whispered back, 5 months, maybe 6. I am not certain. Who is the father? Sachiko's face crumpled. A soldier, Japanese. He was killed on Okinawa. We were not married. My family, if they knew, they would disown me. She grabbed Fumiko's sleeve, desperation making her bold. And if the Americans find out, they will take my baby. I know they will. The propaganda said they'd take children. They experiment on them. The propaganda said many things. Fumiko's voice was gentle but firm. Not all of them were true, but some of them were. Some of them must have been. Fumiko was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the American medic who had bowed to every woman he examined. She thought about the food they had been given, the beds, the heating, the complete absence of the brutality they had been promised. I will not tell anyone, she finally said, but there is a condition. Sachiko's grip tightened. Anything. Let me care for you. Let me examine you each day. And if I see danger, if something goes wrong with the pregnancy, we must find a way to get help. Even if that means telling the Americans. They will take my baby. Perhaps. Or perhaps they will surprise us, as they have surprised us already. Sachiko wanted to argue, wanted to insist on absolute secrecy no matter the cost. But she looked at this older woman, this nurse, who had seen hundreds die, and she recognized something in her eyes. Compassion. Real compassion. The kind that came from having lost too much to let anyone else lose more. I agree, Sachiko whispered. Fumiko nodded. Good. Now sleep. You need rest. The baby needs rest. She started to rise, then paused. What will you name it? Sachiko's hand moved across her belly in a slow circle. Hikari, if it is a girl. What does that mean, light? Sachiko's voice broke slightly. Because right now there is only darkness around me. I want my child to be the light. Fumiko felt something tighten in her chest. Something she thought had died on Saipan with soldier number 247. Hikari, she repeated. It is a beautiful name. She returned to her own bunk and lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to the breathing of 100 sleeping women. One of them was carrying a secret that could destroy everything. And Fumiko had just become the keeper of that secret. She did not know yet that others would join her, that an American medic with a dead sister would become their unlikely ally, that a wall of women would form around Sachiko Tanaka and her unborn child. She did not know that kindness would prove more powerful than all the hatred in the world. All she knew lying there in the darkness of Fort Douglas, Utah, was that she had made a promise, and she would keep it, no matter what it cost. End of part 1. The secret had been discovered, but discovery was only the beginning. In the days ahead, more women would learn the truth. A conspiracy of protection would form. And the greatest threat would come not from the prisoners or their guards, but from a man who believed that rules mattered more than lives. The baby was coming, and nothing would ever be the same. By the end of the first week, 20 women knew about Sachiko. No one had told them. They simply noticed. The way she moved, the way she ate, the way her hand always drifted to her belly when she thought no one was watching. And instead of reporting her, they formed a wall. It happened without discussion, without planning, without anyone giving orders. One woman noticed another positioning herself between Sachiko and a passing guard. Then another did the same. Then another. Until a silent conspiracy of protection wrapped around the pregnant girl like armor made of flesh and loyalty. Fumiko became the general of this invisible army. She assigned tasks with the precision of a military commander. Who would walk with Sachiko to meals? Who would stand near her during roll call? Who would create distractions if guards looked too closely? Harumi was assigned to watch Harrison. The choice was deliberate. Fumiko knew about Harumi's hatred. She had seen the cold fire in the younger woman's eyes whenever Americans came near. She believed that hatred would keep Harumi vigilant, would sharpen her attention, would make her the perfect spy. She was wrong about the hatred. She was right about everything else. Watching the enemy. Harumi watched Harrison like a hawk watches a rabbit. She memorized his schedule. When he arrived at the medical building, when he took his meals, when he made his rounds through the barracks. She noted which guards he spoke with, which prisoners he examined, how long he spent with each patient. She was looking for weakness, for the moment when the mask of kindness would slip and reveal the monster beneath. The mask never slipped. Instead, she saw things that made no sense. She saw Harrison sit with an elderly woman who had developed a fever, staying by her bedside for an entire night, replacing cool cloths on her forehead, even though no regulation required such attention. She saw him learning Japanese phrases from a small notebook, practicing pronunciation during his breaks, determined to communicate with his patients in their own language. She saw him bow to every woman he encountered, every single one, without exception, without mockery, with what appeared to be genuine respect. One evening, Harumi found Private Tommy Blake smoking near the laundry building. Tommy was 19 years old, red hair, freckled face, the kind of boy who looked like he should be playing baseball rather than guarding prisoners of war. He had been kind to the women, sneaking them extra bread when no one was looking, pretending not to notice small violations of rules. The prisoners called him the boy among themselves with something approaching affection. Harumi approached him with a question burning in her mind. "The medic," she said in her broken English. "Harrison, why he kind..." Tommy took a long drag on his cigarette before answering. "Sarge lost his kid sister last year, Sarah. She was 17. Cancer took her real fast." He exhaled smoke into the cold Utah air. "He wasn't there when she died. Couldn't get leave in time. Tore him up something awful." Harumi stood frozen, the words hitting her like stones. "Since then," Tommy continued, "he treats everyone like their family. Says if he couldn't save Sarah, he'll save everyone else he can. It's his way of honoring her, I guess." He flicked ash from his cigarette. "Some of the guys think he's soft, going easy on the enemy and all that. But I figure there's been enough hate in this war. Maybe a little kindness ain't such a bad thing." Tommy wandered off, leaving Harumi alone with thoughts she did not want to think. The American medic had lost his sister. She had lost her mother. They were enemies on opposite sides of an ocean of blood, and yet they carried the same wound. That night, lying in her bunk, Harumi stared at the ceiling and felt the first crack spread through her wall of hatred. She tried to patch it, tried to remember the flames over Osaka, the smell of her mother's ashes, the burned bodies in the streets. But the crack remained, and it was growing. 2 weeks passed. The women developed routines for protecting Sachiko that became as natural as breathing. During meals, they surrounded her at the table, laughing and talking loudly, passing food onto her tray, in movements so subtle that no observer could detect them. A spoonful of rice here, a piece of bread there. An extra portion of vegetables transferred while hands gestured in animated conversation. Sachiko needed to eat more than the others. The baby demanded nourishment. But eating more would draw attention. So they fed her in secret, each woman sacrificing a small portion of her own meal so that 2 lives could be sustained. During work assignments, they maneuvered to keep Sachiko in positions that required minimal movement and maximum concealment. Kitchen duty was perfect. She could stand at a counter washing dishes, her growing belly hidden behind the wooden frame, her loose clothing disguising what closer inspection would reveal. During the evening hours when guards made their rounds, women positioned themselves strategically throughout the barracks. If a guard's path would take him too close to Sachiko's bunk, someone would create a distraction. A question asked in halting English. A request for water. A minor complaint that required attention. The conspiracy operated with the precision of a military operation. But Fumiko knew it could not last forever. Each day, Sachiko's belly grew larger. Each day, the loose clothing became less effective at hiding the truth. Each day, the risk of discovery increased. They were racing against time, against biology, against the inevitable moment when no amount of maneuvering could conceal what was growing inside her. The threat materialized on a Tuesday morning. His name was Captain Robert Mercer, 45 years old, silver hair cropped close to his skull, a face that looked carved from granite, eyes the color of winter ice. He arrived at Fort Douglas with orders to inspect security protocols and assess the treatment of prisoners. Someone in Washington had received reports that the detention facility was being run with insufficient discipline, that guards were becoming too familiar with prisoners, that the enemy was being coddled rather than contained. Mercer intended to correct these deficiencies. His first act was to summon Harrison. The meeting took place in the camp commander's office, a small room with wooden furniture and the American flag hanging limply in the corner. Harrison stood at attention while Mercer circled him like a predator examining prey. "I have reviewed your medical reports, Sergeant." "Yes, sir." "You spend considerable time with individual patients, more time than regulations require. I believe thorough care produces better outcomes, sir." "You bow to them." Harrison said nothing. There was nothing to say. "You bow," Mercer repeated, his voice flat as a blade, "to enemy prisoners, to women who served the nation that attacked Pearl Harbor, that tortured American soldiers, that committed atrocities across the Pacific. They are patients under my care, sir. I treat them with the respect I would show any patient." Mercer stopped circling. He stood directly in front of Harrison, close enough that the sergeant could smell coffee on his breath. "Your sister died last year." The words hit Harrison like a physical blow. He kept his face neutral, but his hands tightened into fists at his sides. "I read your file," Mercer continued. "I understand that personal tragedy can affect judgment, can make a man soft when he should be hard, can blur the line between compassion and weakness." He leaned closer. "But let me be clear, Sergeant. These women are prisoners of war. They are not your family. They are not your patients in any civilian sense. They are the enemy temporarily in our custody awaiting repatriation." He stepped back. "From this point forward, all medical examinations will be conducted with my approval. Any unusual findings will be reported to me directly. Any deviation from standard protocols will be noted and addressed." "Understood, sir." "I am not here to punish these women, Sergeant. I am here to ensure that proper order is maintained. There is a difference between cruelty and discipline. I intend to demonstrate that difference." He turned toward the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Dismissed." Harrison saluted and left the office. His hands were still shaking when he reached the medical building. The enemy had arrived, and he wore an American uniform. Mercer watches. Mercer was not a cruel man. He had served in the Pacific. He had seen what Japanese soldiers did to American prisoners, the beheadings, the torture, the death marches. He had helped liberate camps where American boys had been starved and beaten and worked to death. He did not hate the Japanese. Hatred was inefficient. But he believed in consequences. He believed that war had rules and that those rules existed for reasons. He believed that treating enemies with excessive kindness sent the wrong message to the world. Weakness invited aggression. Softness encouraged contempt. The only language that enemies understood was strength. He began observing the camp with methodical attention. He watched how the women clustered around one individual during meals, how they positioned themselves during roll call, how certain women always seemed to be between certain guards and certain prisoners. He noticed patterns. He did not yet understand what those patterns meant, but he knew something was being hidden, something that violated the orderly operation of his facility. Captain Mercer was patient. He had learned patience in the jungles of New Guinea, waiting for days in ambush positions, motionless, silent, until the perfect moment to strike. He could wait here too. The truth would reveal itself eventually. It always did. Sachiko's fear. Sachiko felt the change in the camp atmosphere, like a shift in pressure before a storm. The guards became more formal. The easy conversations between prisoners and Americans grew stilted, then stopped entirely. Harrison still smiled when he saw the women, but the smile had become strained, and he spent less time in the barracks. Something was wrong. She learned about Captain Mercer from whispered conversations that passed through the barracks like wind through leaves. A new officer had arrived, strict, cold, asking questions, watching everything. Her hand moved to her belly, cradling the child she could not see. "We have to be more careful," Fumiko told her one night. "This officer is looking for something. He does not know what yet, but he is looking. What if he finds out? Then we will face that moment when it comes. For now we continue as we have been. Careful, quiet, together." Sachiko nodded, but her fear had grown teeth. It gnawed at her constantly now. In the mess hall she barely ate, terrified that any attention would lead to discovery. In the barracks she avoided moving, afraid that her changed gait would betray her. At night she lay awake, one hand on her belly, listening to every sound, expecting at any moment to hear boots approaching, voices demanding, hands reaching to take away everything she had left. The baby moved inside her, oblivious to the danger growing steadily, toward the moment when hiding would become impossible. The examination order. On the third week, Mercer made his move. A notice was posted in every barracks. Comprehensive medical examinations would be conducted for all prisoners. Every woman would be examined individually. No exceptions. The announcement hit the camp like a bomb. That night, the women who knew about Sachiko gathered in a corner of the barracks, voices hushed, faces tight with fear. "She cannot go through with it," one woman said. "They will see immediately. If she refuses, they will be suspicious. They will force her. What if we say she is too sick to be examined?" Mercer will not accept that excuse. He will send his own doctors. The debate circled without resolution. Every option led to discovery. Every path ended at the same terrible destination. Fumiko raised her hand for silence. "There is one possibility," she said slowly. "We make her genuinely appear ill, not pretending, actually ill enough that examination would be dangerous." How? Fumiko's expression was grim. "There are ways. Hot compresses applied through the night to raise body temperature. Salt water to induce vomiting. Certain foods that cause genuine digestive distress. That could hurt the baby. Mild illness will not harm the pregnancy, but it must be convincing. Convincing enough that even Mercer would not risk moving her." Sachiko listened to them discussing her fate, her hands pressed against her belly, feeling the child move inside her. "I will do it," she said quietly. "Whatever is necessary." Fumiko nodded. "Then we begin tonight." The deception, the morning of the examination, Sachiko lay on her bunk drenched in sweat. Her skin pale as paper, her body trembling, with genuine chills. It had worked almost too well. Harumi had applied hot cloths to her skin throughout the night, raising her temperature to the edge of fever. Fumiko had prepared a mixture of salted water and herbs that induced waves of nausea. By dawn, Sachiko looked like a woman on the edge of death. The other women clustered around her, expressions of genuine concern mixed with theatrical performance. When the guards came to escort prisoners to the medical building, they found a scene of controlled chaos. "She cannot be moved," Fumiko declared, positioning herself between Sachiko and the guards. "She has been vomiting all night. High fever, possibly contagious." The guards hesitated. None of them wanted to be responsible for spreading illness through the camp. Harrison arrived within minutes, summoned by the disturbance. He took one look at Sachiko, and his medical training kicked in. "Let me examine her," he said, kneeling beside the bunk. Fumiko moved to block him. "If you come close, you risk infection. Whatever she has, it spread quickly." "I am a medic. I have dealt with contagious diseases before." "With respect, Sergeant, the risk is not just to you. If you become infected, you cannot treat other patients. The entire camp medical system depends on you." Harrison hesitated. The logic was sound, and the woman on the bunk did look genuinely ill. "I will return this afternoon," he said finally. "If her condition has not improved, we will need to transport her to the camp hospital regardless of risk." He left. The women breathed, but they had only bought hours. Mercer's suspicion. Captain Mercer was not fooled. He had seen men fake illness in combat. He knew the difference between genuine sickness and performance. And while the woman in Building 3 appeared convincingly ill, something about the scene felt staged. The way the other prisoners clustered around her. The older nurse who positioned herself as gatekeeper. The barely concealed relief when the examination was postponed. They were hiding something. He did not confront them directly. Direct confrontation would only drive the secret deeper underground. Instead, he continued watching, gathering information, waiting for the moment when the truth would reveal itself. That evening, he reviewed the prisoner manifest in his temporary office. 130 women. Names, ages, unit assignments. Nothing unusual on paper. But paper did not tell the whole story. He began cross-referencing examination records, looking for discrepancies, looking for the woman who had never been fully examined. The name surfaced within an hour. Sachiko Tanaka, 20 years old. Medical examination incomplete due to claimed illness. Mercer circled her name and began planning. The conversation. That night, Harumi could not sleep. She left the barracks and walked through the cold Utah darkness, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Guard towers swept their searchlights across the compound, but she stayed in the shadows, invisible, alone, with thoughts that would not quiet. She found herself standing outside the medical building without consciously deciding to walk there. A light burned in one window. Harrison was still awake, working late as he often did. Harumi did not know what she intended to do. Turn back, keep walking, disappear into the night. Instead, she sat down on the wooden steps of the medical building and stared up at the stars. The door opened behind her. "You should not be out here," Harrison said. "It is cold and against regulations." Harumi did not move. "I know." Harrison stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he stepped outside and sat down on the steps beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. They sat in silence, two enemies sharing the same cold night, looking up at the same distant stars. "Beautiful," Harumi finally said, her English rough but understandable. "Stars same everywhere. Japan, America, same stars." Harrison nodded slowly. "I never thought about it that way. But you are right." More silence. But it was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had run out of words for their complicated feelings. "My mother," Harumi said quietly. "Osaka. Bombs. Fire." Harrison turned to look at her. In the starlight, he could see the pain carved into her young face. "I know," he said. "I am Ari. You sorry your country killed her?" "Yes, and I am sorry. Sorry does not bring her back. Sorry does not undo anything, but it is what I have." Harumi was quiet for a long moment. "Your sister," she finally said. "The boy soldier tell me. She die." Now it was Harrison's turn to sit in painful silence. "Sarah," he said eventually. "Her name was Sarah. She was 17. She wanted to be a nurse like me." "You not there when she died?" "No, I was in California, too far, too slow. By the time I arrived, she was already in the ground." Harumi nodded slowly. She understood that particular agony, the torture of not being present, the eternal question of what might have been different if only you had been there. "We same," she said. "Both lose, both hurt." Harrison did not argue. There was nothing to argue. "The war is over," he said, "but the pain continues, for both sides, for everyone." He stood up, brushing dirt from his uniform. "You should go back to your barracks before someone notices you are missing." Harumi rose, but she did not immediately leave. She stood facing Harrison, searching his face for something she was not sure she would recognize. "You good man," she said. "I think so now. Before I think enemy. Monster. Now I think just man. Sad man. Good man." Harrison's expression softened. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Harumi turned to walk away. Then she stopped. She thought about Sachiko, about the baby growing inside her, about the secret that was becoming impossible to keep. She thought about Harrison's dead sister, about his promise to save everyone he could. She made a decision. "Sergeant Harrison," he looked up. "There is woman," Harumi said slowly, choosing each English word with care. "In my building, she searched for the word, finally placing her hands on her own belly in unmistakable gesture. Harrison's eyes widened. "She afraid," Harumi continued. "Afraid Americans take baby. She hide. We all hide for her." Harrison stood very still, processing what he was being told. "How far along?" 6 months, maybe 7 now. "She needs medical care." "She afraid. If you tell..." Harumi made a gesture of something being taken away. "She lose everything." Harrison was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was steady. "I will not take the baby, I promise." "How I know you tell truth?" Harrison reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph. He handed it to Harumi. In the dim light, she could make out the image of a young blonde girl smiling at the camera, full of life that no longer existed. "That is Sarah," Harrison said. "I made her a promise before she died. I promised I would save everyone I could. Everyone. Without exception." He took the photograph back, handling it with reverent care. "I intend to keep that promise. To her. And to you." Harumi looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Tomorrow," she said, "I bring you to her." She walked away into the darkness, leaving Harrison standing alone on the steps of the medical building, holding his sister's photograph, facing a decision that would test everything he believed. The promise. Morning came cold and gray. Harumi found Harrison waiting outside the barracks, his medical bag in hand. She led him inside without speaking, past rows of bunks where women watched with frightened eyes, to the corner where Sachiko lay. The deception of the previous day had left her genuinely weakened. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed her body thin despite the pregnancy that was becoming impossible to hide. Harrison knelt beside her bunk. "May I examine you?" he asked through Fumiko, who had materialized like a protective spirit. Sachiko looked at Harumi, at Fumiko, at the faces of women who had risked everything to protect her. Then she looked at the American medic, who was supposed to be her enemy. "Yes," she whispered. Harrison's examination was gentle, professional, thorough. He checked her blood pressure, listened to her heart, felt the position of the baby through her belly. When he finished, his face was serious but not alarmed. "The baby is healthy," he said. "Good heartbeat, good position. But you are undernourished. You need more food, more rest, less stress." Sachiko's eyes filled with tears. "You will not take her." "No." "You promise?" Harrison met her gaze directly. "I promise. Mother and baby will stay together. I will help you. I will protect you both." Sachiko began to cry. Not from fear this time, from something she had almost forgotten existed. Relief. Fumiko placed a hand on Harrison's shoulder. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you help us? We are your enemies." Harrison was quiet for a moment. "Because I made a promise to my sister. Because there has been enough suffering in this war. Because a child is innocent regardless of where it is born or who its parents are." He stood up. "But we have a problem. Captain Mercer suspects something. He will not stop until he finds what we are hiding. We need a plan." The women looked at each other, at the American who had just become their ally. "What kind of plan?" Fumiko asked. Harrison's expression grew grim. "The kind that will require all of us to take risks we may not survive." He began to explain. Outside the barracks, unnoticed by anyone, Captain Robert Mercer stood in the shadow of a supply building, watching the medical sergeant enter and exit a building where no examination had been scheduled. He did not know yet what secret was being concealed, but he would find out. And when he did, there would be consequences. End of part 2. The alliance had formed. Enemies had become protectors. Hatred had transformed into trust. A wall of women and one American medic stood between a mother and the forces that would tear her from her child. But the greatest challenge was still to come. Captain Mercer was patient. Captain Mercer was thorough. And Captain Mercer was closing in. The baby was coming, and time was running out. Harrison gathered them in the storage room behind the medical building. It was 2 in the morning. The camp slept. Guard towers swept their lights across empty grounds. Only shadows moved through the frozen Utah night. Harumi, Fumiko, Tommy Blake, and Harrison himself. 4 people from 2 sides of a war that had killed millions united now by a secret that could destroy them all. "Mercer will order another examination within days," Harrison said, keeping his voice low. "He suspects something. He will not stop until he finds it." "What do you suggest?" Fumiko asked through Tommy, who translated with nervous energy. "We hide Sachiko, here, in the back room of the medical building." The words hung in the cold air. "That is impossible," Fumiko said. "Mercer inspects this building. He will find her." "Not if we are careful." Harrison moved to a door at the back of the room. He opened it to reveal a small space, perhaps 8 feet by 6 feet, originally designed for storing supplies. "This room is not on the official building plans. It was added during construction as an afterthought. Mercer does not know it exists." Harumi stared into the cramped darkness. "She lived there for how long?" "Until the baby comes. Weeks, maybe. I do not know exactly." "And when baby comes," Harrison's face was grim, "then we pray that Mercer is not nearby, and we deliver the child as quietly as possible." Tommy shifted uncomfortably. "Sarge, if we get caught helping prisoners hide from a superior officer, that is court-martial. Prison time. Dishonorable discharge." "I know." "You are willing to risk that?" Harrison thought about Sarah, about the promise he had made, about the young woman in the barracks whose only crime was carrying a child. "Yes." Tommy was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, I am in. What do you need me to do?" "Watch Mercer. Let me know when he moves, where he goes, what he asks about. You are invisible to him. Just another young private. Use that." "And me?" Harumi asked. "Coordinate with the women in the barracks. When we move Sachiko, we need everyone to cover for her absence. If Mercer asks where she is, the story must be consistent. She was transferred to another facility. Paperwork error. administrative confusion. He will check records. I will handle the records. Harrison's voice was steady. I have access to medical files. I can create documentation that supports the story. Fumiko studied the American medic with eyes that had seen too much death to trust easily. Why do you do this? She asked. Truly, not the answer you gave before, the real reason. Harrison was silent for a long moment. Because my sister asked me to save people. Because this war took everything good and turned it to ash. Because somewhere in all this hatred and killing, there has to be something worth saving. He paused. That baby is worth saving. That mother is worth saving. And if I have to break every rule to do it, I will. Fumiko nodded slowly. In her eyes, something shifted. The last barrier of distrust crumbled. Tell us what to do, she said. We will do it. The move. They acted 2 nights later. At 2 in the morning, Harumi and Fumiko came to Sachiko's bunk. They woke her with gentle touches, explained in whispers what was happening, helped her to her feet. Sachiko was trembling, not from cold, from fear and hope and a dozen other emotions that had no names. Where are we going? Somewhere safe. The American will protect you. I am afraid. Fumiko took her hand. I know. But you are not alone. We are with you, all of us. They moved through the barracks like ghosts. Other women watched from their bunks, silent witnesses to the conspiracy. Some reached out to touch Sachiko as she passed. Hands on her arm, her shoulder, her back. Small gestures of solidarity that said what words could not. Outside, the cold hit like a wall. Sachiko wrapped her arms around her belly, protecting the child within from the bitter Utah wind. Tommy waited in the shadows near the medical building. He had disabled the nearest searchlight earlier that evening, claiming electrical malfunction. The repair would not happen until morning. For now, a corridor of darkness stretched between the barracks and their destination. They crossed the open ground in seconds that felt like hours. Harrison was waiting at the door. He ushered them inside, locked the door behind them, led them through the darkened medical building to the hidden room at the back. The space was cramped but not uncomfortable. A cot had been set up with clean sheets and warm blankets. A small table held water crackers, medical supplies. A battery-powered lamp provided soft illumination. Sachiko stood in the doorway, taking in her new prison, her new sanctuary. You will stay here, Harrison said through Tommy. I will bring food and water every while. Fumiko will come to check on you and the baby. No one else can know you are here. For how long? Until the baby is born, until it is safe. Sachiko looked at the cot, the blankets, the small comforts that had been prepared for her by people who were supposed to be her enemies. Thank you, she whispered. The words were inadequate, but they were all she had. Harrison nodded. Rest now, you need your strength. He left her there in the darkness, with only the child growing inside her for company. The waiting 8 days passed. 8 days of hiding, 8 days of fear, 8 days of a secret growing heavier with every hour. Sachiko lived in a world of shadows and silence. She measured time by Harrison's visits, by Fumiko's examinations, by the movement of her child within her. The baby was active now, kicking, turning, preparing for the journey into the world. Sachiko spent hours with her hands on her belly, feeling each movement, talking to the child she had never seen. Your father was brave, she whispered in the darkness. He smiled even when everything was terrible. He found beauty in the worst places. You will be like him. I know it. She told the baby about Kenji, about how they met, about the stolen moments of joy in the midst of war, about the promises he had made that would never be kept. He wanted to take me to his village, to meet his mother. He said we would have a house by the sea. Tears ran down her face. I do not know if we will ever see the sea, but wherever we go, I will tell you about him. I will make sure you know how much he loved you, even before you existed. He loved you. Outside her hidden room, the camp continued its routines. Roll calls happened. Meals were served. Guards made their rounds. And Captain Mercer continued his investigation. Mercer closes in. The captain was methodical. He interviewed guards, reviewed schedules, cross-referenced reports. He built a picture of the camp's rhythms and patterns, looking for anomalies, searching for the thread that would unravel the mystery. The breakthrough came on the 6th day. One of the guards mentioned seeing Sergeant Harrison leaving the medical building at unusual hours, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, times when no medical emergency could justify his presence. Mercer filed this information away and began watching the medical building himself. On the 7th night, he saw Harrison enter the building at 2:15 in the morning. He watched through binoculars from the shadow of a supply warehouse. Harrison was carrying a container, food probably, for someone who should not be there. Mercer did not act immediately. He wanted to understand the full scope of what was happening before he struck. On the 8th day, he summoned Harrison to his office. "Sergeant, I have noticed you keeping irregular hours at the medical building." Harrison's face remained neutral. "Medical emergencies do not follow schedules, sir." "Indeed, but your logs do not show any emergencies during those hours. Some cases require observation that does not warrant official documentation." "What cases?" "Minor concerns, sir. Monitoring patients who might develop complications." Mercer leaned forward across his desk. "Sergeant, I am going to be direct with you. I believe you are hiding something in that medical building. I believe it involves the prisoner who conveniently became ill during the examinations. And I believe that if I search that building thoroughly, I will find evidence of a serious breach of regulations." Harrison said nothing. "I am giving you one chance," Mercer continued. "Tell me the truth now, and I will consider leniency. Continue lying, and I will bring the full weight of military justice down on you and everyone involved." The silence stretched between them. Harrison thought about Sachiko in her hidden room, about the baby who could be born any day, about the promise he had made to protect them. "With respect, sir, I have nothing to tell you. If you wish to search the medical building, that is your prerogative." Mercer's eyes narrowed. "Very well. I will conduct a thorough inspection tomorrow morning. Every room, every closet, every space where something might be concealed." He stood up. "You are dismissed, Sergeant. I suggest you use the remaining hours wisely." The race against time. Harrison walked from Mercer's office with ice in his veins. Tomorrow morning, that was all the time they had. He found Tommy near the mess hall and pulled him aside. "Mercer is searching the medical building tomorrow. We need to move Sachiko tonight." Tommy's face went pale. "Move her where?" "I do not know yet, but she cannot be there when he arrives. She is 8 months pregnant, Sarge. Maybe more. We cannot just move her around like cargo. We do not have a choice." Harrison's mind raced through possibilities. The barracks were too obvious. The other buildings were too exposed. There was nowhere in the camp that Mercer would not eventually search, unless they moved her outside the camp entirely. The thought was insane. Impossible. A pregnant prisoner of war smuggled out of a military facility hidden somewhere in the Utah countryside. But impossible was better than captured. "Tommy, I need you to do something that could end your military career." The young private looked at him steadily. "What? I need a vehicle and a destination. Somewhere outside the camp where we can hide her until the baby is born." Tommy was quiet for a long moment. "My uncle has a farm about 20 miles from here. He does not ask questions. He would help if I asked." "Would you ask?" Tommy thought about his own sister back in Iowa, about what he would want someone to do if she were in trouble. "Yes," he said, "I would ask." The labor begins. They were preparing to move Sachiko at midnight when everything changed. Harrison entered the hidden room with final instructions for the journey. He found Fumiko already there, her face tight with concern. "What is wrong?" "The labor has started." Harrison felt the floor shift beneath him. "How long?" "An hour, maybe 2. The contractions are still far apart, but they are getting stronger." He moved to Sachiko's side. She lay on the cot, her face sheened with sweat, her hands gripping the blankets. "The baby is coming," she gasped. "I can feel it. The baby is coming now. We need to move you. There is a search tomorrow morning." "I cannot move." Her voice was strained with pain. "If I try to walk, if we try to drive somewhere, the baby will come in the car. On the road, anywhere but here." Harrison looked at Fumiko. "How long do we have?" The older nurse shook her head. "First babies are unpredictable. Could be hours, could be much sooner. But she is right. Moving her now is too dangerous. Then we deliver here, tonight, before Mercer arrives. And if the search happens before the birth is complete," Harrison's jaw tightened, "then we face that moment when it comes. but we do not stop trying until we have no other choice. He turned to Tommy, who stood in the doorway, face pale with the magnitude of what was happening. Go to the barracks. Bring Harumi. Tell her to come quickly and quietly. Tommy nodded and disappeared into the night. Harrison turned back to Sachiko. He took her hand, feeling her grip tighten as another contraction rolled through her body. Listen to me, he said, his voice steady despite the fear churning inside him. We are going to get through this. All of us, together. Sachiko looked at him with eyes that held pain and terror, and a desperate kind of hope. Promise me, she whispered. Promise me my baby will live. I promise. It was a promise he did not know if he could keep, but he made it anyway, because sometimes promises were all you had. The night became a blur of pain and fear and determination. Harumi arrived within 20 minutes, slipping through the darkness like a ghost. She took her place beside Sachiko, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement in Japanese. Fumiko and Harrison worked together, two healers from opposite sides of a war, united by the urgent need to bring a new life safely into the world. The contractions intensified. Sachiko screamed into a pillow to muffle the sound, her body twisting with each wave of pain. You are doing well, Fumiko told Hiro. The baby is in good position. Soon now, very soon. The hours crawled past. 3 in the morning, 4, 5. Outside, the first gray light of dawn began to touch the Utah mountains. Mercer would begin his search in 2 hours. Push, Fumiko commanded. Push now. Sachiko bore down with all her remaining strength. Sweat poured down her face. Tears streamed from her eyes. She had nothing left. No reserves, no strength beyond the primal need to bring her child into the world. I cannot, she gasped. I cannot do this. You can, Harumi said fiercely. You have survived bombs and war and starvation. You have survived everything they threw at you. You will not give up now. Sachiko looked at her, at this woman who had hated Americans with burning intensity and now stood beside an American medic working to save a life. She pushed again, and again, and again. And then just as the sun broke over the mountains, a new voice filled the room, thin and high and impossibly beautiful. The cry of a newborn baby. Hikari Fumiko lifted the child, checked her quickly, and placed her on Sachiko's chest. A girl, she announced, her voice cracking with emotion. Healthy and strong. Sachiko looked down at her daughter for the first time. Small, perfect, covered in the evidence of birth, but already the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The baby's eyes were closed, her tiny fists clenched, her mouth open as she cried her arrival to the world. Hikari, Sachiko whispered. My light, my Hikari. She was crying now, not from pain, from a joy so overwhelming it could not be contained. Harrison stood back, watching the mother and child, feeling something break open in his chest. Something that had been locked away since Sarah died. He had kept his promise. He had saved someone. We need to clean up, Fumiko said quietly, and we need to decide what happens next. Mercer will be here in less than an hour. The words crashed into the moment like stones thrown into still water. Harrison nodded. I will deal with Mercer. You take care of them. He walked toward the door. Then he stopped. Whatever happens, he said, I do not regret any of this. Not one moment. He left before anyone could respond. The confrontation. Captain Mercer arrived at the medical building at exactly 7 in the morning. He brought 2 guards with him, men he had selected for their loyalty and their lack of hesitation. Harrison was waiting at the front door. Good morning, Captain. Sergeant, Mercer's voice was flat. Step aside. I am conducting an inspection. Before you do, sir, there is something you should know. I doubt anything you say will change what I am about to find. Perhaps, but you should know anyway. Harrison stood firm, blocking on the entrance. Last night, a prisoner gave birth to a baby girl. She is in the back room of this building. She and the child are both healthy. Mercer's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. You admit to hiding a pregnant prisoner from examination? Yes, sir. You admit to falsifying records? Yes, sir. You understand these are serious offenses? Yes, sir. Mercer was silent for a moment. Then he pushed past Harrison and entered the building. The guards followed. Harrison walked behind them, his heart pounding, his mind racing through possible outcomes. They found the hidden room. The door was open. Inside, Sachiko lay on the cot, the baby cradled against her chest. Fumiko stood beside them like a protective spirit. Harumi stood in the corner, defiant, ready to fight if necessary. Mercer stopped in the doorway. He looked at the exhausted mother, at the newborn child, at the women who had risked everything to protect them. "Leave us," he said to his guards. "Wait outside." The guards exchanged glances, but obeyed. When they were gone, Mercer stepped into the room. Sachiko clutched Hikari tighter, her eyes wide with fear. "Please," she said in broken English. "Please not take baby. Please." Mercer stood very still. For a long moment he said nothing. His face was unreadable, carved from stone. Then the baby made a sound, a small cry quickly soothed by her mother's touch, and something in Mercer's stone face cracked. "I had a daughter once," he said quietly. "She died when she was 3. Scarlet fever. Nothing the doctors could do." The room was absolutely silent. "That was 15 years ago. I have not spoken of it since." He looked at Sachiko, at Hikari, at the bond between mother and child that nothing, not war, not hatred, not regulations, could sever. "I came here to enforce rules, to maintain order, to ensure that the enemy was treated according to protocol." He paused. "But that child is not my enemy. That child is 3 hours old. She has not chosen a side. She has not committed any crime. She is simply alive." He turned to Harrison. "This never happened, Sergeant. There was no hidden pregnancy. There was no unauthorized birth. There is only a prisoner who required emergency medical treatment in the child she delivered under your care." Harrison stared at him, unable to believe what he was hearing. "Sir, you will file the appropriate paperwork today. The birth will be recorded as having occurred under proper medical supervision. The mother and child will be transferred to the regular barracks when they are strong enough." He moved toward the door. "And Sergeant, yes, sir. You kept your promise. To your sister, to this woman, to that child." He paused. I hope someone would have done the same for my daughter if she had lived." He walked out without another word. Aftermath. 3 days later, Sachiko carried Hikari into the barracks for the first time. The women gathered around them, touching the baby's tiny hands, marveling at her perfect fingers, crying and laughing at the same time. They had won. Against all odds, against every force arrayed against them, they had protected one of their own. Harrison came that afternoon with a gift wrapped in brown paper. Sachiko opened it carefully. Inside was a small stuffed bear, worn and faded, clearly old and clearly cherished. "It belonged to my sister," Harrison said. "Sarah said every baby needs a friend. I think she would want Hikari to have it." Sachiko held the bear, feeling its weight, understanding its significance. "I cannot accept this. It is too precious. That is exactly why you should have it. Sarah believed in kindness, in helping people, in the goodness that survives even the worst of times." He touched the bear's worn fur. "Hikari is that goodness. She was born from love, protected by courage, delivered by enemies who became friends. She is proof that something beautiful can come from something terrible." Sachiko bowed deeply, the bow reserved for those who have given gifts beyond value. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for my daughter's life, for my life, for showing me that not all enemies are monsters." Harrison smiled. "Thank you for showing me that not all strangers are enemies." That evening, the women gathered in the barracks for a celebration unlike any they had experienced since the war began. Someone produced tea. Someone else found crackers and fruit. They sat in a circle, passing Hikari from arms to arms, each woman holding her for a moment, blessing her with silent prayers in a language the Americans would never understand. Harumi sat beside Harrison, translating as women shared stories and hopes and dreams for the child who had united them. "They say she is lucky," Harumi told him, "born in the land of the enemy, but surrounded by love. They say she will grow up strong. She will do great things." Harrison looked at the tiny baby being passed from one set of loving arms to another. "I believe it," he said. The parting spring came to Utah. Snow melted from the mountains. Green returned to the valleys. The war receded further into memory with each passing day, and one by one the women began to leave. Repatriation happened in stages throughout 1946. Ships carried prisoners back to Japan, back to a homeland that had been destroyed and was slowly being rebuilt. Sachiko was among the last to leave. On her final day, she stood before Harrison outside the medical building, Hikari in her arms, the worn teddy bear clutched in the baby's tiny fist. "I do not know how to say goodbye," she said. "Then do not say goodbye. Say until we meet again." Sachiko smiled. It was the first genuine smile he had seen from her since she arrived at Fort Douglas. "Until we meet again." She bowed. He bowed back, and then she walked toward the truck that would take her to the ship, to the ocean, to the homeland she had left a year ago so as a prisoner and now returned to as a mother. Harumi was on the same transport. She lingered at the edge of the group, uncertain, wanting to say something, but not knowing what. Harrison approached her. "You should go," he said. "The truck is leaving." "I know." She looked at him. At this man she had hated with every fiber of her being. At this man who had become her ally, her friend, her proof that enemies were just people wearing different uniforms. "I came here wanting to hate you," she said. "All of you. I wanted to hate you until I died." "I know. You made it very difficult." He smiled. "I apologize for the inconvenience." She almost laughed. Almost. "When I go home," she said, "I will tell people about you, about what happened here. I will tell them that Americans are not monsters, that kindness exists everywhere, that enemies can become friends." That is a good story to tell. It is the truth. She extended her hand, an American gesture, a bridge between two worlds. Harrison shook it. "Take care of yourself, Harumi. Take care of yourself, William." She turned and walked toward the truck without looking back. Harrison watched until the vehicle disappeared around a corner, carrying away the women he had grown to care for, leaving him alone in an empty camp with nothing but memories and a promise he had finally kept. 30 years later, Tokyo, 1975, a woman stood before a university classroom lecturing on the history of American and Japanese relations. Her name was Hikari Tanaka. She was 30 years old, a professor of history, an author of 3 books on post-war reconciliation. On her desk, beside her notes and her glasses, sat a worn teddy bear. Students often asked about it. She always told them the story, about a prison camp in Utah, about enemies who became protectors, about an American medic who kept a promise to his dead sister by saving a woman he had never met and a child who had not yet been born. She told them about Harumi Oshiro, who had carried hatred in her heart until kindness melted it away. About Fumiko Watanabe, who had counted the dead until she helped bring new life into the world. About Tommy Blake, who risked his career because he could not stand by while injustice happened. She told them about Captain Robert Mercer, who had come to enforce rules and instead discovered mercy. And she told them about her mother Sachiko, who had hidden a secret in her body, who had been protected by a wall of women, who had given birth in a hidden room while the enemy searched for her. History, Hikari told her students, is not just about wars and treaties and the movements of armies. It is about people, about the choices they make when no one is watching, about the courage to do right when doing right is dangerous. She touched the worn teddy bear. This belonged to a girl named Sarah Harrison. She died at 17 before she could become the nurse she dreamed of being. But her brother kept her memory alive by saving others, by treating enemies with kindness, by proving that compassion is stronger than hatred. She looked at her students, young faces, Japanese and American, and from a dozen other nations, a classroom that would have been impossible in 1945. Sarah never met my mother. She never met me. But her gifts saved us both. Her love passed through her brother's hands, protected a child who had not yet been born. She paused. That is the power of kindness. It travels through time. It crosses borders. It turns enemies into friends and strangers into family. She smiled. My mother named me Hikari. It means light. She chose that name because she wanted me to be the light in the darkness of her life. She picked up the teddy bear and held it gently. I have tried to be that light. I have tried to honor the people who saved me by telling their story, by reminding the world that even in the worst of times, goodness survives. The lecture ended. Students filed out, heads full of history, hearts touched by a story they would carry with them forever. Hikari stayed behind alone in the empty classroom, holding the bear that connected her to a girl who died 30 years ago in a country on the other side of the world. Thank you, Sarah, she whispered. Thank you for your brother. Thank you for your love. Thank you for the promise that saved my life. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Tokyo, a city that had been destroyed and rebuilt, a nation that had been an enemy and become a friend, a world that had known terrible darkness and found its way back to light. Hikari Tanaka, daughter of War Child of Hope, set down the bear and walked out into the evening. The story was not over. It never would be, because kindness once given never truly ends. It passes from hand to hand, heart to heart, generation to generation. It becomes part of the fabric of the world. It becomes a light. And light, no matter how dark the darkness, never dies.